Then we kept going, and then I like stopped and backed up, and then we decided like, let you go on your day. They're basically doing it over
Fine, freeze. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's really fun.
Someone thought they could do it at this was under the assumption that I had that idea.
Sort of on my radar. Never assumed
for the
I'm going to read Tim?
Wonderful. Nice to meet you.
Today's joint workshop between the Majority Policy Committee and the Senate Local Government Committee is designed to focus on the economic health of our third-class cities, requested by my good friend, Senator Scott Martin. We have 53 cities of the third class scattered all across Pennsylvania, various shapes and sizes. And while some of these communities are thriving, others are struggling and in serious need of economic revitalization. Our goal for today's workshop is to discuss the challenges facing these cities and what we as state officials, local officials, and community representatives can do to create a better community for everyone. Once again, I want to thank all of you for coming out, and I'm sure the conversation that we're about to have should be very beneficial. We're looking for what works and what doesn't work. And so with that, let me turn the gavel over to my good friend Scott. Mr. Chairman, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. First, I want to thank Chairman Argold for allowing this policy committee meeting to go on, and also my colleagues who are here, Senator Mike Fulmer, just north of us, in parts of Lebanon, Dolphin, and York, I believe, and Senator Kristen Phillips Hill, who's from York County, right across the river, who I remind often that the river belongs to Lancaster. But very grateful that they're here today, and I want to say a special thank you to Mayor Sirachi in a lot of our conversations on issues that we're trying to communicate as to the needs of the city. This was something she brought to my attention very quickly about some of the concerns she had, and I think I know how my colleagues feel about the vision of Lancaster from around the state. They look at Lancaster as being where there's a lot going on, one of the healthier third-class cities. So to hear any kind of warning signs about the future is important for us to pay attention to. Local government reform as it pertains to counties, municipalities, is something that's not new in terms of discussion, but it's probably very long in terms of actual action. I can remember my days as a county commissioner. I'd served on the governor's local government advisory commission, very bipartisan, all kinds of local government entities, and they're very quick to rally. These aren't typically Republican and Democrat issues, but they're really quick to come forward with ideas, and often those ideas get lost in the fog up in Harrisburg. But if we don't soon listen to what it takes to allow them to survive, to flourish, we're going to see a lot of our older communities that are grown out face a lot of difficulties. So with that, we look forward to the presentations today. Sure, I think we'll start off this morning. Mayor Deneen Sirachi, the city of Lancaster, and I understand she's going to have a PowerPoint presentation for us.
Yep, I have a little slide deck here that I'm going to use, and for members on the dais, you have the screens in front of you. For the audience, you'll have, hopefully, very soon, an image on the screen behind us. Bernie, little TA. So while this is warming up, I would like to just acknowledge members of Lancaster City Council. Would you mind please standing to be recognized? Council President James Reichenbach, Pete Soto, Faith Craig, and Ismail Smith-Waddell, thank you for being here today. I'd also like to recognize residents for their care and concern for the city and being here. And Bernie. Okay, we're going to proceed. So the city has a strategic plan, building a stronger Lancaster block by block, and one of the 4 priorities is around sound government. Sound government is nothing if we are not responsible caretakers of public funds and our taxpayer dollars. The city's operating budget is about $114 million. About half of that is our general fund, and that pays for fire, police, street maintenance, parks, and public property. We also have numerous what we call enterprise funds. Those are sewer, water, and the like. These are all fee-based. We're not going to be talking about those today. We're mostly going to be talking about the general fund. Property taxes contribute 50% of our general fund revenues, and our total costs related to public safety, just as an example, are $36 million. So right there, right off the bat, you understand that the property taxes that we are taking in on an annual basis are not covering very basic public safety costs related to police and fire. So for those of you who are following along on the paper, if you're looking at the general fund stability pie charts, you can see that between 2007 and 2019, the costs of the percent of that's allocated to each of the areas in the city budget, whether that's police, fire, public works, administrative services, haven't really changed, but costs have continued to increase. So I'm going to draw the panelists' attention to the next slide, which is a very, very difficult looking table to read. And Bernie's trying to do one more thing here. So at the top of this spreadsheet, you'll see our revenues, and they are increasing at a very modest pace between, I don't know, 2.6, we had a really good year in 2019, which I can explain, and about 8%. So let's call it, our revenues are increasing about 1% a year. Our expenditures, on the other hand, increase between 2 and 3% a year. And this is essentially maintaining a flat tax rate. So this is assuming that we don't increase taxes ever again, and we just keep on the trajectory that we have. Essentially, this results in the next page, which is a structural deficit. Because when you have 3% increase in expenses and only a 1% increase in revenues, that gives you a deficit. 3 minus 1 is 2. That 2% equals about $1 million annually for the city. And this is the structural deficit that I am looking to address and need help from Harrisburg to address, because the structural deficit grows each year. So it's not like it's just 2% this year, 2% next year. It continues to compound year over year over year. And the panelists, my colleagues here on the dais, have on the next page a chart that shows a gap between revenues and expenses, and it goes like this, and it just gets bigger over time. So what have we done? Because there's really two ways to address this problem. We can reduce expenses, and we have done those things. We have become self-insured for medical expenses. So our medical expenses have increased an average of only 3% a year in contrast to the national average, which is 6%. We've refinanced bonds, saving $12 million in the last decade. We've reduced future post-retirement benefits through negotiations, very collegial negotiations with our union members here in the city. We could talk about pension reform another time, but that's something that we also need help from Harrisburg. We've also held the line on funding, on spending, and this is very important because a lot of people, residents, are asking, well, how is it that costs continue to increase? We're talking about 2 to 3% increase in costs year over year over year. And we've also reduced staffing levels over time. We've also looked at how do we increase revenues. So we've increased revenues by raising property taxes 8 of the last 14 years, right? 8 of the last 14 years. We've also increased fees to accurately reflect our expenses. We can't make money on, for example, building permits. We need to charge fees that are in keeping with our actual costs. Why were there so many property tax increases? Well, let's take a look back to 1965. Who was around in 1965? Raise your hand. I was not. Okay, just honestly speaking. This was, Act 511 was passed. This was the Local Tax Enabling Act of 1965. You probably, for those of you joining me up here, you know all about Act 511, but for those in the audience, it is a combination of taxes that are prescribed for Class 3 cities like Lancaster, my colleagues here from York and Harrisburg, that they have to live within. So, one of them is real estate taxes. We all charge real estate taxes. There isn't a city across Pennsylvania that isn't recovering costs through real estate taxes. But there are 10 other options in addition to real estate taxes. And those are a mixed bag of things, and I'm going to talk about the 4 city tax revenues that we collect. So, revenues, real estate tax, 49% of our total revenues. We have a rate that's set at 11.7 mils. That rate is set by myself in consultation with City Council. The second tax, the earned income tax, generates about $6.4 million. That rate is set by state law. The third tax, local service tax, that rate is also set by state law. Finally, the real estate transfer tax. That generates about $1 million a year. That rate is also set by state law. Do you sense a trend? Yes. Yes, shake your head. Okay, so where does that leave us in terms of in terms of our revenue generating opportunities in the city? So to address the structural deficit, property taxes would need to increase 30% over the next 5 years. 30% over the next 5 years. And why is that? Because that is the only tax that is available to us as a city and that we have control in terms of raising. Another option, earned income tax. In order for us to generate $1 million-ish, just using that as an example, $1 million with the earned income tax at the rate that is currently set by state law, the average household income in the city of Lancaster would have to increase $8,000 per year every year. To address the structural deficit using the local service tax with the rate that is currently set by state law, an additional 21,000 people would need to work in the city every year. Every year, 21,000 people would have to come to work in the city of Lancaster because we get $48 from every one of those people. To address the structural deficit using the existing real estate transfer tax of 0.5%, we'd have to hope and pray that $200 million more of real estate is sold every year. $200 million more of real estate to generate $1 million to address our structural deficit. This would account, basically, what this would mean is that Park City would have to sell every single year. Every year. And what I can say about Park City is that it actually did sell last year, and it generated about $1 million. And that $1 million is going directly to fund our new fire stations, which have not been touched since 1950-ish? Okay, you get the idea. There's also this other tax that we could use. It's called an amusement tax. And I, just for fun, looked at Barnstormers, which has the largest capacity in terms of an audience. They sell their tickets for about $14.50. We're maxed at 10%. We could collect 10% surcharge on every ticket. So that'd be $1.45 if you could do that math. We'd have to sell 690,000 tickets per year with the amusement tax to generate $1 million to address our structural deficit. And last but not least, my favorite that's included in the 1965 Act, and if you could see the image on the screen, it would be of a jukebox, which is a mechanical device, which we could collect taxes on. And unfortunately, I can't even do the math on a jukebox because I don't even know if there is one in the city, or how much we could actually generate with all of the coins that would have to be added to a jukebox to generate $1 million. So, what have we learned from this little trip down history lane from 1965 and the Local Tax Enabling Act 511? Is that we do not have the tools that we need to continue to maintain the essential services that our residents rely on every single day. Every business relies on them every single day. So, how did we do it the years in between when we didn't raise taxes? Unanticipated income from real estate sales, like when Park City sold. Expenditures under budget. Every year, our staff does an amazing job of holding the line. Reductions in staff, staff vacancies, refinancing debt, a reliance on reserves, and sometimes, quite frankly, a hope and a prayer. And this is not how we should be budgeting a $114 million budget every year. So, you might be wondering about all the development, because we've just heard from our senators about how great Lancaster is doing. And it's true, it's doing awesome. There's so much development. We've got the best engine works, Conestoga Plaza, Holiday Inn in Lancaster Square, Fulton Bank, 101 North Queen, which is happening right behind us after a decade of sitting vacant. But it doesn't translate into income for the city. It does not translate into income for the city. There, I said it twice so that you underscore that. The reason why is that they're not necessarily bringing in vast numbers of jobs. We're not generating revenues from sales tax, liquor sales, restaurant, luxury taxes, whatever you want to line up, we do not have the tools to do that. So, one number that stands out that I want you all to really think about is that our total tax assessed value between 2006 and 2017, even after everything you've seen in Lancaster, all the accolades, 1.35% growth, not over a year, over a decade. Because why? You can go and have your tax assessed down. Some go up, some go down, some go up. We've been able to maintain a steady line at 1.35% over a decade. Imagine for a minute if the economic development wasn't happening in the city and what that would mean in terms of assessed value. We would be in even more dire straits than we are right now. So, for a city that's basically done everything right, receiving accolades, our residents seeing headlines like Lancaster CRIS funding jumped 70% to $6.4 million. Not a dime of that is going to pay for general fund expenses. It's very important that we have CRIS. I'm very grateful that we have that in the city of Lancaster, and we also have to be realistic about what that means for our overburdened taxpayers. And I'm just going to end with a little example, a story from my neighbor, Glenn. I was riding my bike, and I was riding past Glenn's house. He often sits on his porch, and he yelled at me, "Hey, Deneen, thanks a lot." And I turned around and I was like, "What?" He's like, "I voted for you and you just raised my taxes 10% and increased trash by $10. Thanks a lot." And I went back to Glenn to tell him about what was happening today, to explain a little bit more about the structural deficit. And it's people like Glenn and the gentleman that I just met in the back row who tell me that they want to know if they're going to be able to continue to live in the city of Lancaster. Enough. I am done. We cannot be pushing residents who are long-time residents who have contributed to the vitality of the city of Lancaster by pushing them out by continuing to raise property taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good also to know who was here before 1965 and who wasn't. Before we move on to our next speaker, I think it's also really important to point out, and I know a lot of folks don't have slides, can you just talk about, obviously, in terms of the impact on the quality of life and people moving in or growing in the city, the tax rates of the school district, which you've outlined in here as well, because that obviously plays a lot in terms of development here.
Yeah, so I'm a proud parent of a student at the School District of Lancaster, and so I have a stake in my daughter's education. And one of the things that's very challenging for all of us as city residents is that what I'm talking about in terms of taxes from the city only represents 1/3 of our property owners' total liability, total tax liability. And we can also have a separate conversation about the fair funding formula for schools and the millions of dollars that Lancaster City is not able to access because we haven't fully implemented that fair funding formula. But in the context of today's conversation, I'm ever mindful that when we are raising taxes and the school district is raising taxes, it's a double whammy, and especially for people who are lower income or who are on a fixed income. And as escrow accounts, when you get that notice in the mail that you need to, your escrow account needs to be increased by $100 a month to pay your taxes, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Right, I think it's just important to notice as we talk about the structural issues, we can just talk about the community in general. I know just having brief conversations with individuals when I walked in here, the first thing that was coming out of the mouth was the impact on property taxes, especially those with fixed income. So, but thank you, and we'll get to the questions in a little bit. We're going to move on now to Mayor Eric Kaplan-Foos from the city of Harrisburg. Mayor, we're glad you're here today too to share.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I want to thank Mayor Sirachi for extending an invitation and for meeting regularly with me and with other mayors of third-class cities in an effort to really understand how similar we all are. I think one of the things that strikes me about the presentation we just heard is that you could pretty much give the exact same presentation for Harrisburg, and I think the same thing would be true for other third-class cities. I wish the audience could have seen the graph on the structural deficit, so I'll hold it up here, but that really is the story that we're talking about here today. It shows revenues essentially flat or increasing at 1% or some marginal amount, whereas other expenditures, whether it is due to pension costs, labor costs, healthcare, you name it, going up at a higher rate. When Lancaster has a chart that looks like that, and every other third-class city does as well, hopefully we are all going to pay attention to that, and we are going to make changes on the state level to allow us different types of solutions to solve these problems. Let me say Harrisburg is very similar to the presentation that we just saw. A similar $60 million general fund, a similar expenditure for public safety with our professionalized police and fire, a similar structural deficit, and when it comes to the revenue streams, we actually have some revenue streams which Lancaster does not. We already have an amusement tax. It's maxed out at 10% and brings in revenue. We have a business privileges tax, and we'll talk a little bit about Act 124 in just a moment. But our expenditures are very similar. And one thing which does set Harrisburg apart from other third-class cities, however, is that we're the only third-class city to have been taken over by the Commonwealth and to actually have gone into receivership. And under Republican governor, Republican administration, the city there was a receiver that was appointed and tasked with the job of looking under every rock of Harrisburg's finances to see if there was a way to eliminate that structural deficit. Jobs were cut, contracts were renegotiated. We don't have a single union contract in the city of Harrisburg in which wages increase more than 2% for the foreseeable future. Several of our unions are only getting 1% raises. And even with that and with everything which the state looked at under receivership, there was no solution to the structural deficit offered other than raising property taxes. In fact, our Act 47 plan, and I think we're going to hear about some other Act 47 plans, called for a 100% property tax increase, which was so shocking and impossible. It led to a new law, which is Act 124. So last year, the city was basically brought this idea to the legislature and talked a lot about what we could do to solve our structural deficit. And we were granted sort of extraordinary taxing power. Mayor Sirachi mentioned that earned income tax and the local services tax are set by state law. That is true. But in Harrisburg's instance, and through Act 124, which, by the way, is called the Intergovernmental Cooperation Act for Cities of the Third Class. So I think it was intended as sort of a prototype for what could be a future solution. We were allowed by law to have our earned income tax, which we had already increased under Act 47 to 2%. We were allowed to keep that at 2%. And we were allowed to keep our local services tax, which we had also increased under Act 47 to $156 a year at $156. Together, that extraordinary taxing power that we were granted in Act 47 raises about 20% of our general fund budget, $11 million. And with that extension, we were allowed the ability, the breathing room, to basically solve our structural deficit in the short term. The only problem with the act is that they gave it to Harrisburg on a temporary basis. Again, I think as a test case scenario to determine how it might work and what the effects would be. And since it is temporary and it's only granted for 5 years, it limits our ability to refinance our debt, go back to the credit markets, borrow, none of which we can do because financial institutions look at it and they see the ticking time bomb and the chart, the structural deficit chart that would exist if we didn't have that extra taxing authority. So we're looking for a long-term solution. Lancaster and other cities are also looking for a long-term solution. And I think we have one in Act 124, but we need to consider making that act permanent. There are certainly other opportunities and other ways to raise revenue, but one of the reasons I like the local services tax as an option is because basically what we've done to solve the structural deficit only amounts to the equivalent of people who have good paying jobs paying an extra $2 a week. By tripling the local services tax, that's it. It's less than the cost of a cup of coffee. In Harrisburg, we put a sort of baseline on the local services tax, which is different than state law, but it basically says you don't have to pay the local services tax at all unless you make a certain threshold, which means basically you have to earn at least around $13 an hour and work full time to reach the threshold which would even allow the local services tax to kick in. So the people that are paying the local services tax, again, getting sustaining jobs and earning money. So it's a progressive tax in that sense. Also, the local services tax, at least in Harrisburg, I think the same would be true for many third-class cities, is actually paid for predominantly by commuters, by people that don't live in the city but come into the city and utilize city services and city infrastructure and you name it. So it is an opportunity for those commuters to help deal with the structural deficit for our third-class cities in a way which is sort of a regional solution and a very positive one. There has been some controversy over that in Harrisburg, but in general, we've had it now for, I think, 3 years to 4 years. We've extended it now for another 5 years, and it's worked out well. There are no complaints on a daily basis about the local services tax. One of the reasons we have to look to the local services tax and the earned income tax, the earned income tax, of course, is paid for by our residents, and it was a shock when we raised the earned income tax, but it was preferable to property tax, is because from a property tax standpoint, and I think, Senator, you just noted this, we are limited. We have a tax base which is already seeing on a yearly basis its school taxes raised to the maximum amount. On a yearly basis, at least in Harrisburg, our water and sewer rates are being raised to the maximum amount allowed by law. We have the highest trash rates anywhere in Pennsylvania due to the history of our incinerator, and that's a whole other story. And we also have incredibly high parking fees. I think I just paid about a third of what it would have cost in Harrisburg to attend this meeting here today in Lancaster. So our population base is already overtaxed and overfeed. It's not a simple solution to just say, let's raise property taxes, 8 out of 14 years. I mean, maybe we couldn't do that even if we wanted to. And when the state's best solution from all the minds of Act 47 came together and said the only solution they could have to solve the structural deficit was raise property taxes essentially 100%, you knew there had to be another solution. So my recommendation today is that we look to Act 124 as a model for all third-class cities, not just Harrisburg. We look especially at the earned income tax and the local services tax. The local services tax, I think, is the easiest way to solve the structural deficit. It would work in Lancaster if you allowed it to be tripled with the least amount of pain. The earned income tax is already allowed to be raised if a city like Harrisburg were to go through the home rule process, and we could have a whole other discussion about home rule, but the problem with that is if you rely on a ballot measure, which is basically do you want your taxes to be raised, it's not likely to pass, despite a lot of effort. So you really have to separate the issue of taxing authority from the issues of home rule. There are many good structural governmental changes that could come out of home rule, but it can't just be a referendum on taxes. So the elevated earned income tax and the elevated local services tax are already the solutions which are provided in Act 47. Those really are the only advantages to going into Act 47 if you're a third-class city. But it is a strange law in that it only grants those solutions temporarily. We should be looking at an exit strategy, we should be looking at a long-term solution, and we should be looking at taking Act 124 and making it a model for all third-class cities.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor. And just add, the thing I always found ironic about Act 47 is we always wait until a local government entity is actually in severe trouble, then we want to offer temporary flexibility, temporary help. And why can't we do that to the front end, flexibility? Up next, we have Mayor Michael Helfrich of the City of York. Thank you for being here today, Mayor.
Oh, thank you, Senator. Thank you for having me, and Mayor Srirachi, thank you for hosting and inviting me. Yes, I can't echo enough the Senator's last comment. We are struggling with that right now. Do we go into Act 47 or don't we? It has been recommended to us by very logical, intelligent people, but is this what you want your city to look like? Do you want to announce to everyone, oh, we can't do this. We can't handle ourselves. What do we do? Hell, Harrisburg. That's not a thing that we in York like to do. And to go back to Mayor Pappenfuss's analogy of this ticking time bomb, our time bomb went off already. It was somewhat subdued or covered. Some people may know that York actually reduced taxes let's see, about, let's see, like $800,000, about $800,000 the last year. But at the same time, when I came into office, I found out that we had been spending out of our fund balance double that money. So it was a good look to make the kind of cover up the bomb, but it happened. Our pension costs, or I mean our healthcare costs, went up 2.8 million in the last 2 years, so approximately 20 to 30% on those. So we've already taken the hit, and I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills yet this year. That's really what it comes down to. I'm a little bit jealous of Mayor Sirachi's 1% growth over 13 years for her value of the city of Lancaster. Our assessment for the taxable property in York was $997 million in 2006, and this year it is 994. So we've seen a 0.3% decrease in the value of our city over the last 13 years. And 45% of our revenue is based on the value of the city. And so I'm also a little jealous of the 2 to 3% growth in expenses because of some bad decisions in the past. We are pretty heavily indebted in our pension fund, as many third-class cities, I believe, are. And so our growth rates have been higher than that, closer to a 5% increase in costs, and 2 to 3% in salaries every year. Love to have 1%. I'm kind of jealous up here of the other mayors and their situations, and we're trying to negotiate, and even negotiating with the unions. It's when the value of the dollar decreases every year, you really can't blame people for wanting an increase. If you don't give them an increase, they're getting paid less every single year, which is the situation I'm in. And I think you as well. Your salaries are set in 1 year, and every year the value of the dollar goes down. So you're actually making less every year. So I can't begrudge the police or the firefighters or anyone for wanting a 2% raise when the CPI is 2%. They're just trying to maintain. So the cost of running any city is going to go up. So how do we pay for it? I almost want to run through this exact presentation. Mayor Sirachi did such a good job. And it is us, except for our revenue and expenses are a little bit lower, and our rate of decline is much more rapid and is already here. Our tax rates, I believe, are the highest in Pennsylvania, other than I think maybe Philadelphia and Pittsburgh might have some higher, but yeah, I believe what was it, about 11 mills, Mayor Sirachi, for you here. 11 and 21. We're 18.75 for the city, 33 mills for the school compared to 21 here in Lancaster. And then our county is at 5%, and I believe you're at 2%, something, or 2 mills. So yeah, our taxes, if you add them up, we have to rebuy our houses every 18 years. That's what we're doing in York. There's no security of property. There's no life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's you will get your property taken from you if you don't come up with 5.6% of the value every year. I think property taxes should be unconstitutional. I think we should find other ways to do it, because once you own something, why is the government taking it away from you? I've got an 85-year-old man who worked at Donsko in Wrightsville all his life, and he took his pension money that was invested, and you can say whether or not this was a smart idea. You know, I remember, you know, it wasn't until 2006, 2007 that people started saying investing in a house is not the American dream anymore. It used to be that you could expect the value of your house to continue to increase every year. But this gentleman took all of his savings and took all of his pension and bought a house in the city of York. And at that time, the total tax rate was around 2 mils. Or I mean, 2%. And now it's 5.6%, and he's getting thrown out of his house. Worked all his life in the foundry, coming home dirty and sweaty, and bought a house, modest house. I think it's worth like $20,000. And he can't hold on to it because we can't figure out a way to pay for the services that everybody needs other than repeatedly every year telling people you don't really own what you bought. So, to our biggest issues in the city. 33%, 34% of our city is nonprofits that are not paying any taxes. Though 56% of that 33% is a hospital where people are making millions of dollars and they're buying up property all over the place, but they don't have money to pay taxes to the city of York for the roads and services that they use. That would be, just that alone, would be a, do the math here, 25%, if that entity alone paid taxes, that would be a 25% increase or $5 million to the city of York. In all other aspects, it appears to be a for-profit business, yet it does not pay taxes to the city of York. You know, I don't begrudge little churches and things like that. I don't, that, you know, doing service, and I see you out feeding the poor and stuff like that. And of course, our hospitals do help our community, but I think there's got to be some give there. And I know that Mayor Pappenfuss and Mayor Sirachi and I have already talked about this a little bit, and I hope that we'll get together and talk with the senators some more about this. Our rate of increase in our pensions, again, these are mistakes in the past, I believe. York didn't pay its pensions for a while. They thought, for some reason, they didn't have to put into it. Former mayors, decades ago. But in 2021, we get a $3 million bump in our municipal obligation. Don't know where I'm getting that. Here's a couple of things we did do, and I will credit the past administration. We were able to negotiate with our unions and lock in some rates, which brought the annual payments down. And so we had some relief. So for instance, for next year, we don't owe anything for pension payment for our fire department, but the next year we owe $4 million. So how do you budget with things flying around like that? That's mostly what is responsible for the $3 million increase in 2021. Then up until 2027, over that time period, we see another $4 million increase in our pension obligation. So, and again, as I believe Mayor Sirachi said, these aren't one-time expenses. These are annual increases that stay there. So $7 million over the next 8 years is approximately 70% increase in that line item. Also, it is that is 25% of our tax base, or our taxes that we can bring in off of our tax base. We also did participate in the Act 205, and so we're trying our best to pay down our pension deficits. Promises were made and promises have to be kept. But what we're finding is, and what we found when I came into office, was that our pension rates hadn't been calculated properly. So we owe, what the Act 205 is that it allows us to increase that earned income tax. So ours is up from 1 to 1 1/4. Harrisburg is at 2, right? I don't know if Lancaster, are you still at 1? Yeah, you haven't, because you have to wait a couple years until you're distressed. It's coming, as you can see. But we were, when you do that, when you increase the earned income tax, that means that you have to, the amount you have to pay into the pension is based on a percentage of the salaries of the employees of the city. So while if you would follow just the pension obligations without bringing in this extra money, you have a rate down here. But as the salaries of the employees increase 2 to 3% every year, we're finding that, sorry, I'm looking here. Yeah, about 2022, we're now paying more out because of Act 205, and our again, more of our general fund money has got to go out. I can understand this in a certain way because we are getting a benefit, we are paying it down, but we don't have the extra money to do that. So the Senate and House and Governor have given us a benefit in a certain way to try and help us pay things down, but it is now hurting us to even participate in that. And we are considering dropping out of the program, which means we're not going to pay down our pension debts as fast. So, let's see. Got just a couple more things here for you. Yeah, any kind of assistance with the pensions, and I don't have an answer. And from what I can tell, you don't have any. Harrisburg hasn't come up with the answer yet either on that, but we need to do something about that. The health care benefits, we are also self-insured, and as most of you know, we had 3 severe tragedies last year where 2 firefighters died in a fire, as well as 2 other firefighters that were severely injured, and we had a police officer die. Well, when you're self-insured, that wipes you out, and so most of the time self-insured makes sense. But we saw, even before that, we saw a $1.6 million increase, as I mentioned before, $1.6 million increase in our insurance costs in 2017. So at the same time they reduced the taxes, we saw this increase. And then another $1.2 million this past year. We can't predict it. It's flying all over the place, and there's no way to budget for this. I mentioned the wages. The cities are the center of our communities, and I'm sure most of you have either possibly lived in or at least been to other states. I'm going to be the extreme radical on here and denounce the archaic medieval municipal system. This doesn't happen in other states, in almost any other states, where York has 72 different municipalities, 72 different governments, you know, and let's throw in the 16 school district governments. It's a mess. Now I know that I think everybody in the legislature got fired in the 60s when we went from, what, 2,500 school districts to 500 school districts, something like that. But we're working with laws from the 1600s, you know, with government systems from the 1600s. This doesn't work. We have people coming in, and yes, the people that work, we get some money from them, but through the LST and the EIT, but we've got all these services. Everybody comes to the cities for the services. Everybody comes to the cities for lots of things. You know, it's not quite the 50s when the cities were everything. I get that, you know, suburbanization has spread things out, although it's coming back together. But there has to be, if we cannot change that, there has to be a way for there to be a county tax that could potentially contribute back to the city core. As you know, the county governments and other governments, the state government, I don't believe pays any taxes to the city that it is in. There ought to be a way that either through income tax, yeah, this is my last statement. There ought to be a way through income tax or some kind of way to use the county to get some money back in to offset the services that we provide to everybody in our counties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I don't think Mayor Muldowney was able to join us. Is he here from Pottsville? How about City Council President Jeffrey Waltman from the City of Reading?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I don't know if this mic is working
It
is on. Okay. I'm usually pretty loud, so I can't tell. But I appreciate a lot of good comments. I mean, sitting here, I first got involved with the city's finances in 1998. I was on a volunteer committee, and those graphs, those deficit graphs were around then, and I don't think they're going to change. It's just inherently the way government operates. We were told then in 5 years you're in a disaster, you're going to collapse, and we did things to avoid that. So in the city of Reading, I've had my hands around the finances. I'm 20 years city council for about 20 years, and we've had some unique situations to our city, yet at the same time, some of the same challenges that these other cities are facing. And I want to speak to some of them very briefly because I hear a lot of good things. The first thing I noticed about Mayor Sirachi's report was that your earned income tax is 0.6%. So in Reading, ours is 3.6%. So when I leave here today, I'm going to look for some properties and see if I can save some money, because that hurt us, obviously. I mean, we have the ability under the home rule charter to control our earned income tax, and our real estate transfer tax, our earned income tax, is second highest in the state. Our real estate transfer tax and our per capita tax is the highest in the state. And we're working in the last 10 years under Act 47. So just a couple things I want to touch on. The first thing I want to say is that these cities in Pennsylvania are the absolute gems of our state. I think all of us get around to York, Lancaster, Harrisburg, Allentown, Reading. Every one of these cities are absolutely beautiful. And they all face a lot of challenges. A lot of the problems that have landed in Reading are state and federal. They're not problems that evolve from. We've lost about 80% of our citizenry in about 8 years. The city transitioned that quickly. And the people aren't the problem, but the rapidness and the evolution of the city was a lot for any city to maintain. In fact, in 1 year there were 17,000 kids in the Reading School District. This is pretty astronomical. In that year, in 1 year, 13,000 of the 17,000 students either moved in and out of the district or within the district. Imagine that level of transiency, and just for the school district to manage that. So I just want to make that point, because as we evolve in the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years, this state is only going to be as strong as our weakest state. And it's important that we get deeply into each city and work on a workout plan that makes sense. And I don't know if it's Act 124, 111, 47, 48, or 49. You know, there are things that are unique to each city, but also, you know, relevant to all the cities. And I think what's happening, when I look at the city already, the number, a lot of people don't realize, the school district is subsidized to the tune of about $190 million. That's a fascinating amount of money put into education. And it's a challenging district, again, because of some of the demographics and the evolution of the transiency of people. But when I look at the scores, I don't expect them to be stellar, but I also don't expect them to see them where I'm at now. You can look at the Overton General's report from last year, and you say to yourself, wow, that's a lot of money. Could we spend it in a better way? The other thing is in cities like Reading, you have a lot of subsidized individuals. I think somebody touched on this: food stamps, cash assistance, medical assistance, housing assistance. And that helps the individuals. What the city doesn't do is get any revenue as it relates to income. So if you want me to stay in the city of Reading and take 3.6% of my salary, I'm subsidizing those people at the local level, and also really at the state level. And you're pushing more and more people willing to stay in a city like Reading out, because those parameters just make it challenging. And what's happening, and this is what Act 47 has done for the city of Reading, it's actually a state law that temporarily protects us from state laws, right? When we get out of Act 47, we're going to lose our 3/10 of the mill commuter tax, generating for us about $3.5 million a year, all of which now is going towards capital expenses, roads, parks, very critical stuff. It's allowed us for the first time to really, in the last few years, really invest in our infrastructure without going out and financing bonds. And the next mayor coming in next year, he and I intend to come up and try to talk to the state legislature and say, hey, if this makes sense in Act 47, why wouldn't we outside of Act 47? And, you know, part of the message to the state is, you know, it's cities like Reading are costing the state more than they're costing Reading. I mean, these downstream costs, if our school district isn't fluent, if these kids aren't coming out of third grade fluent in English, spelling, and math, we're paying for that down the road. Food stamps, prisons, and all the things, and not to mention just the personal cost of those individuals, not given a lifetime of prosperity. So, you know, I think a workout, but I think the state should really step back and say, you know, for each city, let's get in there. Let's do a workout plan that utilizes all the tools, that builds economic development, diligently gets these cities stabilized, turn them not into center points of poor, but polish them and make them center points of the state, so that they become anchors for the state and not looked upon as detriments. And you know, that's a challenge. I get that, but I think if we do that, we not only help the cities, but we definitely help the state. I think we can translate that kind of proactive development into state savings long term, and people will step back and say, hey, that makes sense. Because right now, I sense that the people, especially some of the legislators in the suburbs, say, well, we're not going to do anything there. And the reality is they're paying for it by not doing it. So I just want to make sure I've covered most of the key points. The pensions were mentioned. I work in the financial services industry. We've got retired officers who get a pension of about $800 a month, you know, for starting. The pension model is always believed to be the ideal model. But if you step back, if you offer the right hybrid or strictly 401k retirement plan, you give them a strong contribution, and they're allowed to, they take on all the risk, but they're allowed to go out and invest it beyond the 60-40 model. Most of these pensioners would have a much more viable source of income in their retirement. And nobody ever seems to broach that. And I would hope the state can take a look at that, because the Act 111 laws require us to fund those pensions, if we could ever get to an amount that allows us to fund, help them fund their retirement, but let them run with it, remove the risk, we could decompress some of the current obligations. The city of Reading has a $95 million budget this year. We're spending about $16 million in pension contributions. And the biggest challenge with pension contributions is the unknown. We carry the risk. If the market crashes, our contribution could go up to 30%. The actual numbers are at best risk sketchy. They're hypothetical. Cities can't afford that kind of guessing. We have to be realistic about what these cities can do. And I had an opportunity to meet with the governor's task force about 2 or 3 years ago. We talked about that because these bodies, these city councils are ever changing. We have to fund the pensions, but most of the people that are doing that aren't really up to speed on the day-to-day inner workings of a pension and what can and cannot be done. So just having them sitting in cities the way that they do are in and of itself have their own inherent risks. Go back to Act 47. So in the city of Reading, we have, because we're a home rule charter, we have the ability to set our own income tax and our real estate transfer tax. Before we went into Act 47, we had 215 police officers. Today we have 167. About 125 of them have 8 years or less of service. So even though we might have saved money, we lost them. We lost, that 1 to 2%. It hurt us because officers say, you know what, I can do better elsewhere. It's actually made us more a incentive for the poor because we were forced to raise, certain revenues, which we needed to do. We can't deny it, but there has to be a better workout plan. If we don't deal with some of the arbitration issues, an arbitration panel can come in and say, City of Reading, now that you're out of Act 47, you're going to pay them 5, 5, or 4. Well, they have the ability to arbitrate these rulings, but nobody's coming in doing the due diligence to say, but you know what, the City of Reading can't afford. Maybe it would be 3, 3, and 2, which is a little fairer to the employees, a little more realistic for the cities. But again, the state laws are structured in a way that mandate that on us, and we have to refund them. That's about the thrust of what I wanted to share here this morning. My message is that these are beautiful cities. There are a lot of solutions. But it's going to take, I think, a workout plan that gets into each city. So what tools can they use and what do they need? An economic overlay strategy across the state that structures these cities in a way that they can build, bringing the companies they need to bring in, but most importantly, get some of the people. Missing in Pennsylvania is a broad-based regional transit system. We don't have a local transit system. Lancaster is fortunate to have a train, right? But we need an ability for a lot of these inner city residents to get to Peter first, to get to Contact, to get to Lancaster, to get to Reading, to grow their career paths and take advantage of not only what's in their city, but what's in the state and what's in the government. I think, that's part of the broader workout plan that if we invest in will help not only the cities but the state. Because I go back to the fact that this state will only be as strong as our weakest city. There are some real issues. In Reading, we have infused our economic development like Lancaster or Untitled. We struggle. We dealt with an onslaught of new people, and we've barely been able to manage that. But it's a beautiful city. When we turn the corner and we polish it and promote it, everyone will prosper and feel that way about the state. We can't look at the cities as separate entities. We've got to make the investment and polish them up so that young, new people that are living, and you can go into any elementary school in the Reading School District and you will be baffled by the beauty of the children. If we can set the stage for them, this will be one of the best places, not only in the country, but in the world. And I just wanted to make those points. I will do that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Up next, we have Rick Shuttler, the Executive Director of Pennsylvania Municipal League. Thanks for joining us today, Rick.
Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Mayor Srirachi, senators, for hosting this and frankly for the interest here. It's great to see.
I'll just explain quickly. The Municipal League is a nonprofit association, nonpartisan. Our mission is to strengthen, empower, and advocate for effective local government. All of the third-class cities are part of our membership, amongst with others. I thought what I put together, and I think everybody up here got it, just some random papers, if you will, but I'll just tell you quickly what they are. First page is our legislative priorities. The next couple pages are excerpts from our policy statement, which I thought were very relevant for today, and we've already hit on some of that discussion. And the last couple are co-sponsorship memos that are all in the House, but that are on point for our discussion today. And I'll jump around a little bit, but I want to go back in time a little. I don't want to take any of what Heather is going to say, but we formed a coalition a number of years ago, Coalition for Sustainable Communities, to attack the Act 111 pension problems. And that coalition was made up of us, the League, as well as chambers of commerce from representing all these cities from across the Commonwealth, because the chambers had come to the conclusion that one of the two big items that were hurting a lot of cities was Act 111 and pensions. Now, not everybody has that issue. We have folks up here that maybe don't have as much of an issue with pensions, but it was pretty universal that was an issue. And we embarked on a journey to try and change that. We haven't been successful yet, but we're still working on doing that. But I'll leave that at that. But it really led us to identify those problems and really try to get to the weeds. So let me just talk a little bit about Act 111. We've heard a little bit about it. Act 111 is binding arbitration. And what Councilman Waltman just referred to is that a neutral arbitrator, there's an arbitrator appointed that represents the public safety unions, one that represents the community, and then a neutral. The neutral arbitrator, and this isn't an exaggeration, a neutral arbitrator is going to make a decision that is going to have a greater impact on the finances of that community, possibly for decades, but more than any of these elected people up here will have. Because they're going to identify, if 60% of the general funds are for public safety, the biggest chunk of that public safety is the cost of the personnel. Everything about the cost of that personnel, from their pensions to their benefit levels to their salary, is going to be determined by that neutral arbitrator. A neutral arbitrator does not have to take into consideration at all the financial capacity of that community. Now, that also works both ways, by the way. That doesn't mean that an affluent community going to get nailed with a huge arbitration because they have the money. It ought to be what's fair and what it is. But frankly, binding arbitration to us has come and gone in terms of a viable way for us to compensate. Obviously, it's not that we're against binding arbitration, but there needs to be parameters put around what an arbitrator can point. So maybe I'll just take a second and talk about, there's a co-sponsorship memo that was put out by Representative Diamond. In past years, we did have one in the Senate, Senator Eichelberger had been a very big proponent of that. What we would do with Act 111 is simply put some parameters around it. One thing that happens now is when you go to arbitration, there's a list of 3 that comes out of the American Arbitration Association. When that list of 3 is presented, the union we always have to go first. The union always goes second. Gives them an advantage because they're making that last pick for that arbitrator, as that arbitrator does this for a living. All we're asking for is a chance, a coin flip, to see if we could go second sometimes. And the other, a couple of other items are, as I mentioned, there are 3 arbitrators. The union pays for theirs, we pay for ours, we also pay for the neutral, even though they may have demanded arbitration. It simply isn't fair. The cost of the neutral should be split. And what all these things would do, by the way, would lead to better collective bargaining. And it would folks wouldn't be so quick to go to binding arbitration in Act 111. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but let me also, just in the interest of full disclosure, we've had a program for many years that frankly has been quite successful in leveling the playing field on Act 111, our Pelotas program. And I think we've done that. However, that can change just like that. And an individual decision can cripple any one of these communities. And I think it's time that we looked at our binding arbitration laws and how we collectively bargain. In terms of pensions, let me state this. We talk about the state of the finances of many third-class cities. The third-class city code defines what pension benefits are to be paid in third-class cities. Act 600 defines what can be paid in townships and boroughs via pensions. The third class city code requires richer pension benefits than Act 600. We wonder, just one of the reasons why cities might be in more distress. The other thing I would just mention associated with that, everyone up here has career fire departments. And God bless our volunteers, and we're having a crisis in volunteers, and some of our third class cities, and certainly others, have volunteer fire departments. But the fact of the matter is, they are also subject to Act 111 and binding arbitration. And it's just, we wonder why taxes are higher. Well, they have this whole career fire department that is also subject to that. It only makes sense that would be the case. A couple other items. Tax exempt. None of these, by the way, there is no one silver bullet here. All these things sort of converge, and all of them need some attention. Just solving the tax exempt issue isn't going to solve every financial problem in every city. Tax exempt is a big issue, though. One of the things that happened was the HUB test is really, which was the hospitalization project, which was a big Supreme Court decision that really put us in a better position to determine who is a charitable entity and who isn't. Was overturned, not overturned, but a new law back in 1998 kind of moved the ball back. But there was a Supreme Court decision in 2012 that really has put the HUB test back in play. And I'm encouraging everyone to take a look at work with your county assessment bureaus to see if, in fact, you can apply that test. Maybe some folks that aren't paying taxes right now ought to do. A couple of other items. We list a menu here of taxation, and I know that can be difficult for members of the General Assembly to be talking about the authorization of different taxes. I understand that completely. And by the way, all of this, when I talk about bills, and when I talk about East Coast sponsorship memos, all of this is about 101, 26, and 1. And that is, how do we get 101 votes in the House? How do we get 26 in the Senate? And the governor to sign it? And that's not easy on any of these. Keep in mind that in Act 111 and pensions, our friends at the FOP and the firefighters unions are vehemently opposed to those changes. And these folks have to face that, and that's not easy. Mayors face it all the time, but it's not an easy vote to make. But that's where we need to get. How can we find that right mix of a pension program, pension reform, and Act 111 reform that makes sense? So the tax, what we believe is in local government autonomy. The people that are best determined what the mix of taxes ought to be in a community are sitting at this table. If there's a belief that in Harrisburg an alcohol tax would make some sense, and if Mayor Pappenfuss decides that that's not going to be a detriment to economic development, that in fact raising property taxes 100% might be more of one, I'd like to have an alcohol tax, and we certainly have other members of East State College. It makes total sense. It's a cost center unto itself. Where do you think those police services are going to? It's all related to that. So it makes sense, but we certainly think there's a menu here of different ones that we think communities ought to be able to pick from. Maybe there needs to be some offsets. Maybe we need to talk about that. There's a payroll tax, which Pittsburgh instituted as part of their recovery plan, that I know many of the folks at DCED that were part of that really encouraged us to look at that on a statewide basis. Maybe there needs to be a little offset, but I truly believe that the communities themselves, and the people who are elected there, are the ones who ought to be deciding with the right menu of taxes. They've got to determine what's going to foster economic development in communities, where there's going to be obstacles to that economic development. Right now, raising the property tax is a big one. Maybe a different menu makes sense. They can figure out what that would be. So I provide that menu there simply for your consideration. The three co-sponsorship memos. The first one is Representative Murphy. I just talked about that payroll tax. Business privilege tax has been a controversial issue. Many of these folks up here have one. Many folks don't who want one. I know affluent townships who believe they'd like a business privilege tax because they think it's a right mix for them. But a payroll tax is also an alternative to look at. And I don't want to get into too much of the weeds of it. The next one is where we've evolved on the whole pension plan. Representatives Grove and Griner have been great friends to us in trying to move forward with municipal pension reform. We had a bill that actually, what Council President Waltman just described, our original bill was a cash balance plan. It did everything that you just said. We can't get anywhere with anything that isn't a defined benefit with the want to have the fund, and I think they can be much better off with the cash balance plan. Yes, there's some risk, but they can end up in a better place. But it's really not, and therefore it's very difficult to get those 101 and 26. But what this does is adopts all of the provisions that were contained in the governor's task force report that was headed by Auditor General DiPasquale. And this bill would put those into law. And some of the things that are in that are not things that we would necessarily advocate for. You know, the reduction of the amortization rate, you know, the assumption is a little bit scary. There's a penalty if you don't pay your MMO. They're helping refer to the non-payment of MMO. But there are a couple of big items in there that we certainly want to move this bill, and we certainly want to talk to the Senate about doing something over there too. We have talked to Senator Blake, by the way, on the Democratic side. The two big items are there could be no pension benefit given, no enhancement if the plan, if we take the plan below 80% funding. That's a huge protection for our members if that were in place. Now it takes an option off the table too for when they're bargaining, but we think it makes a lot of sense to put that into place. It also would limit pension benefits, the calculation of a pension benefit to be base salary plus a cap on overtime of 10%. We have seen abuses of that. Now, good collective bargaining agreements cover that language and get it right, but not all of them have that. So that you could be up to 30% on overtime, and in many cases, overtime, someone's taking more overtime in their later years, and it can spike that. There's also sick time buyouts. We've seen those things included. This would limit everything to that. The other thing it does that it's a little bit scary, but I think I understand it. What I talked about was the actuarial assumption. And that is, if you're assuming, we have some folks who assume a pretty high rate that shouldn't be assuming that high rate, but they did so because they didn't feel like they had any choice. So if you're going to have to go down to over a 10-year period, you have to go to the Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System, which is a statewide municipal retirement system, which is right now at 5.5. Now that to me is exceptionally low, but I get it. We're trying to get everybody to not that's part of what this would do. So you would have to move down to there over a 10-year period. We are going to try to negotiate a little bit as we see if we can get a PMRS rate plus 1, maybe get an extra 2 years, but agree to putting that in place, because at the end of it, I think it is better for our community, but we don't want to create too big of a spike for anybody. But that's pension. That post-launch memo is out right now, and we're going to support that, and we hopefully we can get something done in that regard. The last co-sponsorship member is what I mentioned with Representative Diamond on Act 111 that we think makes a lot of sense. Very, very difficult to get any traction on any of those things. Two things I want to leave you with, two reports I want to leave you with that certainly I think support everything you've heard from mayors. But Pennsylvania Economy League, the Communities in Crisis report that was released in 2017 that identifies these issues in a statistical and a data-driven way and offers remedies that I think are very, very relevant to this discussion. And there's a lot of supporting data there. It's the Communities in Crisis of 2017. The second one is one that the Local Government Commission did in 2012, which was a mandate study that identified so many things. If you took those two studies and pulled a lot of the things that you heard today that are addressed there, you have the support to move them forward, and we certainly would be a partner on any of those items. So I'm glad to entertain any questions for the time of right center. Thank you.
Hopefully get the questions soon. I do want to take a moment and represent my Ryan, Senator Ryan Allman, was able to join us. Thank you for being here today. We're very blessed in our community to have many partners that help work for the health and sustainability needs. We have two here, and up first, I'd just like to hear a little bit from Heather Valutis, like your chamber. Heather, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you to the chairman, members of the committee, to the mayors for being here. We are thankful to have this opportunity to speak and discuss this matter that's critically important to our cities, our towns, and our rural communities. We've long been saying that as our city goes, so will our other municipalities, and so we look at this as a real opportunity for discussion. We believe that thriving communities are essential for a prosperous state and a healthy business environment. Since 2012, our chamber, along with 40 others that Greg had mentioned, businesses, municipal and community development organizations have collaborated as the Coalition for Sustainable Communities, committed to helping communities address growing economic and financial challenges. We joined with the coalition 7 years ago specifically and emphatically to take the case for municipal reforms, from pensions to binding arbitrations to economic development options. Since its inception, we have been working to gain the attention of lawmakers on the need to address this issue. Locally, we have been fortunate to have the support of Representative Greiner and other members of the delegation in looking at these issues. Yet, since its inception, the challenges associated with the issues have only gotten worse. We firmly believe that continued failure to address municipal cost drivers will continue to burden cities and result in higher taxes on employers and their employees, and make it harder for municipalities to attract and retain talent, businesses, and a skilled workforce, both of which are necessary for vibrant, thriving, and prosperous communities. No one wants to live and work in an overtaxed, unsafe, and underserved township, borough, or city, and we are at a point where everyone across the country is competing for talent. From a business perspective, distressed municipal finances and limited options to fix the issue are an economic challenge. With baby boomers retiring and the workforce landscape changing, it is imperative that we're able to grow and retain the talent we have in our community, while attracting talent that can help to meet the workforce demands. A report to be released today, as reported via Axios News this morning, cites that workforce mobility is at historic lows, meaning far fewer people are moving to new counties or states, which further highlights the need to retain our own. But it also highlights that people from distressed areas end up with a deepened sense of being left behind, which has greater social and political impacts. From a municipal perspective, focusing specifically on distressed municipal pensions are a budget and public safety issue. Public safety pensions represent one of the largest and fastest growing budgetary costs to most full-service municipalities. This cost driver, left unchecked, casts a shadow over the future of any type of long-term fiscal planning and results to cutting in staff or leaving vacancies opened, as was referenced, inclusive of fire and police, and growing pressure on the delivery of municipal services like public works. The local government structure in Pennsylvania, which consists of 2,566 local governments, 53 of which are third-class cities like Lancaster, is the most obvious and well-entrenched problem. Every single one of these municipalities is a creation of the Commonwealth and must live under the rules established by the General Assembly. The most problematic of these rules is the state-forced over-reliance on property taxes by all levels of government, including county government. Property owners, including business property owners, cannot continue to be expected to fund public safety, public education, public works, and county government, all on property taxes. Local governments deserve certainty and predictability, taxpayers deserve accountability, and valued public safety employees deserve retirement security for their years of service. Currently, none of these elements exist, which creates a tentative economic climate for businesses and residents alike. In short, we believe that unless this problem is addressed immediately, it will mean more municipal taxes, less public safety officers, less public services, and bluntly, less hope. Hardly the foundation for a positive economic climate. With the vision that Lancaster County is recognized as a model of prosperity, the business community and the Chamber are eager to play an active role in helping to shape an approach that can bring about consensus and meaningful reform for our municipalities that will best serve the community, inclusive of using tools that exist today and expanding those options. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Joining us also, Lisa Riggs, the Lancaster County Economic Development Company. Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to err on being quite brief and also extemporaneous in the interest of time. And I appreciate that we have decision makers here at the policy level that are focused on looking at the state as a whole, and the policies that and procedures that you are looking at have to apply to many and not just one. But the piece that I just want to really lift up is our context here in Lancaster today, and really bringing it back to where Mayor Sirachi started, which, and I do think is your presentation going to be available? There's this presentation that the mayor offered at the beginning is incredible and rich in information. And part of the story that it tells is just the journey that Lancaster has been on. For many people that are here today, particularly from this community, this is decades of incredibly hard work, a lot of collaboration that has driven what I would say, and we've seen it by the national headlines, extraordinary recognition for the economic development that's happened here. We put Lancaster City up as a model. we've done almost everything right. And I'm not saying we're perfect, but we're really proud and we've worked really hard, and there's a lot of people in this room, partners, that have put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it. And then to see what the mayor's dealing with and the city council members who are here and the residents and what they face, that level of frustration, you could hear it. It's palpable with our mayor, the time and effort that we're spending as a community to fix something that, because we don't have local control when we've done everything else right, is, I think, the heart of the frustration of what we're hearing today. The other piece I would just say and know, because there's been a lot of solutions offered, there's a number of pieces that could be taken or steps that could be taken at the state level, is, and I want to just reinforce this with our state level policy makers here, is we're going to work really hard on economic development and continue to do that in Lancaster. We have good colleagues and friends in York and Harrisburg and Reading. We all talk together. We all want each other's community to have strong jobs, strong investments, strong residential neighborhoods. That's what we live for every day. Economic development isn't the answer, and the mayor's presentation shows that. Lancaster is the quintessential example of public and private investment. We have an anchor healthcare institution, we have an anchor academic institution, we have an anchor regional bank, we have law firms, we have so much private sector momentum in our community. That's not going to drive the sustainability of our municipal governments. We're the test case. We've done it right. And so I think I would just encourage our policymakers to think about giving local municipalities the flexibility they need. Some of the tools are there. Maybe there's new tools that need to be developed. But the mayor in her presentation points to tools that exist that she doesn't have the flexibility to manage. And those are the tools that are going to make this city and the rest of the third-class cities successful, and hopefully more successful. So with that, I'll leave it for other comments or discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Some questions for members and Senator Arnold and City Hall.
Thank you, Senator. I hope you all caught that. I mean, for an economic development official to say economic development is not the answer is the equivalent of a baseball bat up against our heads. And so we get that, and that came through loud and clear. I did have a meeting in one of the boroughs that I represent up in Schuylkill County in Tamaqua on Monday with my congressman. It was all about the CRIZ and the opportunity zones. And I know obviously Lancaster has one, CRIZ, Lebanon wanted one, York wanted one, Pottsville wanted one, Harrisburg, and York, this governor is not a fan. The legislature has given him the authority to create 2 new ones a year because, quite honestly, we thought it really had incredible potential. I've seen in the city of Allentown, I've told their senator that I hadn't seen an American city with that kind of a comeback, I think, in my lifetime. The closest that I can compare it to was my trip to Berlin after they tore down the wall. I mean, it's really coming. But what you tell me is that, the CRIZ isn't enough either. And I'm curious, is the difficulty with the CRIZ that it just takes too long, even a 30-year program, to see immediate results? Or is it because you have parts of the city growing, but at the same time you have parts of the city declining, so that mixed bag just kind of balances itself out?
So I want to just, I'm assuming you're addressing that question to me.
The second part of my question is for someone else.
Yes, so the CRIZ, so we need to have economic development happening in the city. We need economic development happening in every city. The challenge is that the economic development that the CRIZ is helping to drive is bringing more people downtown, more workers, et cetera, et cetera. But as you know in the presentation that I made, it's not enough scale in terms of the number of people that are working downtown within the tools that are available to us through the earned income tax and local service tax and so on, to meet the needs on a year-to-year basis. So I lose sleep over the 2021 budget for the city of Lancaster. At the same time, it's very difficult for me to be both celebrating the economic development in the city of Lancaster and to be talking to our residents who are struggling to make ends meet. And my campaign is built on 4 priorities: strong neighborhoods, safe streets, secure incomes, and sound government. And I talked a lot about extending the vibrancy of our downtown into our neighborhoods. The surest way I know how to do that is to make sure that they have dollars in their pocket to spend on the things that they need and not be overburdened with property taxes, which, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, you're paying for them.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The second part of my question, I hear a lot of optimism about these new federal opportunity zones. And I have to think that that could impact each of the communities represented here. None of you mentioned it. And so is this going to be a genuine big deal, or is this just another, yeah, it helps a little bit, but it's not enough?
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's one thing that I'm very, very excited about, and I was invited down to the White House to work with some of the different agencies on what they are doing. So there's 2 parts to the opportunity zones. The one that most people talk about is this long-term investment. How do we get people to invest? But unfortunately, and maybe you can help on this, lobby our Congress, the IRS didn't put the rules out in time to actually get the maximum upfront benefits of the deferment of the capital gains. So we're stuck there. Now, the long term, there is still the opportunity of the long-term investment. The money that you invest doesn't get any taxes if you keep it in for 10 years or longer. So I think right now we're working very hard on a marketing strategy to take advantage of that. We've spoken with different funds that have the money and want to invest. I mean, people don't want to pay taxes. They'd rather invest it. Definitely, that should work. But I think from what I can tell, and I hate to, I'll say even York, we've been behind. In Pennsylvania, we've been behind some larger cities that are getting rapid advantages from that. So 3rd-class cities, we all have to, I know Erie is a model for what needs to happen to get a prospectus out, to get investors really looking at that. So I would encourage all of my fellow mayors or other representatives of the 3rd-class city to look at what's going on in Erie.
We're going to actually be there next month.
Excellent.
At the suggestion of Senator Lockwood.
Okay, good, because the folks up there have got it going on. And but one other thing, and that is that the other benefits, and the reason why I was down at the White House was about grant funding. Everybody should know that our opportunity zones now get priority points or preference points for any grants that are going in. But of course, grants are short-term kind of injections, unlike the goal of the opportunity zone. So I'm still high on the opportunity zones, but it's taken us longer, and the term that Congress gave us was too short.
Senator, if I might jump in on the opportunity zones as well. I appreciate the mayor's optimism on that. As an economic development official, I'm not nearly as optimistic, particularly in the context of this conversation and the needs of the municipal governments. The types of projects that we're going to see in the zones that we're designating in Lancaster are fairly small to the extent that we see any trickle-down impact. And they're very complex, and was noted, the guidelines and requirements are not only late, but they're very complex. So I would put that type of opportunity in the context of everything else that's happened in the city of Lancaster in the last 15 years, and this will be a dot, if it is a dot at all, in the next 3 to 5 years. And what it doesn't do is provide any direct income to the municipal coffers that will help to shrink that structural deficit over time. I hope my negativity is wrong in the long term. It could end up being a tool in the toolbox, but not one that I would bank as being significantly beneficial in the next 3 to 5 years.
And if I may, and Lisa, you kind of hit on it. So I'm sitting here today, Lancaster's had the economic development we haven't had, but what we have is the taxation capacity that they don't. So, and this goes back to the workout, and the two items, you know, the Act 111 issue, the arbitration, the fact that a three-member panel can make stronger decisions impacting my city than I can, without any financial due diligence. Those are the issues that we need to fix. And their ability to have taxation capacities in a variety of ways. Our ability to deal with Act 111 in a more straightforward way that's realistic, because what's happening, all these enterprise zones and keystone opportunity zones, they're being put on top of this loose foundation that we are constantly subjected to. And if we don't fix those laws, we are constantly exposed to those risks. And I go back to the pension reform. I mean, unions don't like it because they hear that and feel like we're taking the pension away. But we could put forward a very lucrative retirement plan for all those employees that would put them in better footing and also set the cities up for better footing as well. And the most important thing is that nobody's deciding on these issues, on Act 111 and pension reforms. But at the end of the day, it's costing the state more than it's costing the cities, because in the end, again, we're subsidizing the Redmond School District up to $190 million a year. You can figure there's another $60 million in individual subsidizations. That's going to grow to $300 million, or we can shrink it down to $50 million over time by fixing the problem. And we keep trying to Act 47, we try to put that on top of those problems temporarily, thinking they're going to go away, we know they're not going to go away, they're still there. So I would like to see us spend more time fixing the root problems. That sets us up for success much more better than any temporary program.
That quote that you gave me about you can't build new things on weak foundations. When I was doing my doctoral dissertation, 13 years ago on PLCs, that would have been really good. I wish I would have had that. Thank you. That's the kind of thing I understand.
There's a $50 charge.
Yeah.
Senator Allman.
Thank you, Scott. I want to first, my life. Sorry. First, I want to express my thanks, Senator Arbol, Senator Martin, for holding this important conversation this morning. As you know, I don't represent the city of Lancaster, a third-class city, but I certainly recognize the direct link between the health of the city of Lancaster, the economic health of this city, and the economic health of the broader Lancaster County community. And so, very much appreciate this conversation. I want to revisit some of the discussion that we've had on tax-exempt properties and recognize that there's a balance, of course, to be struck here between these non-profit charitable entities that are doing vital work, life transformational work in the community. But of course, there's a balance that has to be struck. Communities that are doing vital work, meeting a need, but not being a drain on resources and providing a net value to the community. My question is with respect to the application of the HUP tests we talked about. And I guess, Rick, if I could ask you first, more broadly, do you have any statewide data that you're able to share with respect to the application of the HUP test since the Supreme Court decision in 2012? And have municipalities been able, under that test, to better define what qualifies as a purely public charity, and specifically, can you point to any, I guess, lack of a better term, success in an entity that had been defined as a purely public charity, and then applying the five-prong test, make a determination that, in fact, that entity doesn't qualify as a purely public charity, and as a result of that, providing additional revenue back into these municipalities?
I don't think, I cannot. I can't decide to do an individual circumstance. County assessment bureaus are really where it starts. What I've been encouraging members to do is to talk to their assessment bureaus, and if they think there is someone in question, to follow up on what you just said. I can't identify one for you. I still think folks are sort of reluctant and aren't recognizing where we are right now, that we're kind of in a different place. And I realize it was 2012 and they should be by now. But it's still sort of, I think, floating out there. But I can't give you one, no.
thank you to any one of the mayors or Council President Waltman. Any anecdotes from your interaction with the hub test that might give some value to this conversation?
Not especially, because I will say we are unique in that one of our largest entities, nonprofit entities here in the city, is making a payment in lieu of taxes that is almost equal to their entire tax liability. And that is unheard of. And so that's just another advantage that Lancaster has, but it's also not, it's not subject to my control that we're absolutely going to get that revenue. So year after year, we are hoping that Lancaster General Health and Penn Medicine will continue to support the city at that level. We collect about $2 million in overall. In terms of the ascertaining whether or not it is truly a charitable, we have not had that kind of dialogue with our partners. And one of the things that I think that underscores this whole conversation is that as the county seats for many communities across Pennsylvania, we are regionally providing services, whether that's government, healthcare, education, cultural institutions. People come to the city for lots of business on a regular basis, and we are precluded from collecting or being supported outside of the municipal boundaries. So we have 30% of our properties in the city are non-taxed, similar to my colleagues at the end of the table. Same story for other cities. And for me, we're not going to get there only by having that conversation, although I understand what's driving it. It's bigger, and its impact for us. And I just want to come back to, like, this is a year in and year out slog every year in terms of how we're putting our budget together. And the fact that you're taking 30% right off the top is very significant.
I'll just add, we don't have control over exemptions either. That's control at the county level, but we'd like to try to establish that and maybe put a cap. And then allow for new exemptions once that cap space is freed up, because it is continuously going up. A lot of it is city and school properties. I want to add, though, our property tax brings in this year about $24 million. Our earned income tax brings in about $22 million. And we collect about nearly $11 million a year through our order system. And we use that lease payment to subsidize the property taxes. And it's an equally distributed taxation, if you will, on all properties, because everybody's paying for the order equally. So it's been one of the ways we've been able to get around the exemptions.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback on that. That's helpful. And Rick, just one additional follow-up for you. Of course, when I came into the Senate in 2015, I engaged in this issue with respect to introducing legislation that would attempt to put essentially the 5-prong test, or to give the General Assembly sole authority in establishing the standard for the tax exemption. I understand your concern with that. You're concerned that the pendulum might swing too far in the opposite direction. But I guess my question for you is, do you see any value with having a test, a strong test, such a hub test, codified in legislation? Do you prefer the judicial approach, or I guess the status quo? And I guess what I'm getting at is, if you were satisfied that the General Assembly would withhold to the 5-prong test or tighten the 5-prong test, would you be comfortable with that approach or not? If you sort of understand what I'm
Yes, I do.
I guess, is there any value in having an ongoing conversation about the General Assembly wading into this?
Yes, there is. I only like the judicial route when it's in my favor. So when the decision comes, so if it went the other way, I'd be telling you, my God, the General Assembly has to codify. So no, I think it's definitely worthwhile. I think, and the issue with that was, it was because we viewed because we now had a judicial decision in our favor, we're now going to we're going to move the goalposts. That was all. I think there's great benefit to it. So look, you mentioned, most of these folks, no matter what we do, and no matter what, that they're going to be considered, purely public charities, as they should be. I get it. It's just that with the reliance on the property tax, that if we have folks that are on the fringes that really aren't, then we need to identify that. I certainly think there's benefit to that. We'd be happy to engage in that. Yes. Thank you.
Senator Phillips.
Thank you very much. Senator Martin, Senator Argall, thank you. This has been incredibly helpful, I think, to bring everyone together to talk about these challenges. And I would say, having cut my teeth in the trenches of local government on a school board, I would say to Senator Almond, having lost one of those suits, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you on that legislation going forward. So thank you. The other thing I'd like to say is that property taxes are a huge problem. Your challenges are your limited tax base. Having been a school board director, was able to hold the line on tax increases by growing the tax base instead of raising the rate. And when York City is looking at almost 40% of its property not being taxable, it's really difficult to take the remaining 60% and grow that tax base. So Senator Argall and the policy committee will be bringing a workshop discussion to Penn State York at my request on August 13th to talk about the challenges we face with local property taxes, and I would welcome anyone who's here today or listening to join us on that date. Further details will be forthcoming, but thank you again, Senator Argall. I guess I entered the legislature in 2015, and probably my biggest question really goes to Rick, and that is that all of this legislation that you referenced today are things that I have worked on and I have supported, even as a suburban and rural House member, recognizing that our cities really are the hearts of our county. They are economic drivers, and that we are all interconnected. Our incredibly historic and edgy downtown New York City with the rest of York County that really has made things happen, and I love to share with my good colleagues from Lancaster that it was not once during the Revolutionary War, but twice as well in the Civil War that York County saved Lancaster, and we know that.
You're not asking me to comment on that, or anything.
If I were you, I wouldn't even wade into that. But my question to you was that we struggled to get that legislation over the finish line. Both of the York and Lancaster City mayors' predecessors were passionate advocates, and we just couldn't build the kind of support that we needed, quite honestly, with my colleagues across the aisle to get them over the finish line. And you spoke the truth when you said there's a mathematical equation that makes legislation happen, and we couldn't reach that threshold. What can you advise us to do to be able to build that type of consensus across both sides of the aisle and have something that's meaningful and will really help our third-class cities?
Sure. No, your point is well taken, and one that we've certainly attempted to address, as you recall, back in those times. There's no way, when you talk about Issues Act 11 as an example, that is the holy grail to the public safety unions. And if we're gonna move a 111 bill of any sort, and a pension bill, frankly, there has to be support from both parties, all four caucuses, and the governor have got to say this needs to happen in order for these cities to change. What can I advise you? I can only advise you to do what you're doing, which is to stand up and be as supportive as possible. We'll continue to work on both sides. I think we have something now, maybe on pension, that can do that. Albeit it's not what we would call reform and what we wanted, but it does. That 80% clause is nothing to scoff at. So I don't want to. I think that's big. But we need help, and I certainly need all of these folks here to be talking to their colleagues on the other side, saying we need this to happen. we need help with it. And obviously, you know, historically, your side doesn't want to talk much about the revenue side. And they want, so we need to have some combination. We need to have some meeting of the minds. Because when we first started with the coalition with Heather's group, it was all, in order to come to agreement with the chambers, we agreed that we would talk about the expense side. Because most of our mayors, the ones you mentioned, felt that expenses really were where the issue was. And that frankly, under Act 111, creating more revenue was just another target. Now, I don't think that's totally the case. And the fact of the matter is, unless we change, we need to have a new revenue model too. But there's no question we have to have both sides on this, but it's not going to happen.
And we would appreciate the support from the mayors to make those things happen
Absolutely.
as well. Indeed. Thank you so much.
Peter, can I say one thing? I think it is worth pointing out that Harrisburg was able to achieve widespread bipartisan support for Act 124 just last year, almost unanimously supported by Democrats and Republicans and a wide coalition. So I think leaving pension aside, which I think is a very polarizing political issue, the local services tax and the extension of the local services tax as a means of solving the structural deficit problem for third-class cities, I think is achievable. And if we look at that model and potentially apply that more broadly than just Harrisburg, we can have a solution that has the votes and has the support of the governor.
Well, and thank you, Mayor. I know that Representative Greg Rothman from Cumberland County was certainly a very passionate advocate to resolve your challenges. So I understand and agree.
I figured I'd close it out with, I'm going to have some questions, but some commentary. And first and foremost, I'll just make a note that it's the second day in a row with a totally different constituency that people have brought up to me about what is a nonprofit and its impact on taxation and other related things. So I think it's always a good conversation to look at. We are blessed in Lancaster to have pilots from entities that are very active in our community. I certainly don't want to disregard that. But it's long past due. You know, I've been involved in local government for a very long time, and so many of the rules and framework that we operate under are so archaic. And getting things changed can be long and tedious. I'll just give you an example. We literally just had a rewrite of the county code, which governs everything that counties can do. That took 8 years. The bipartisan local government commission working on that. So I think my first power question, Rick, when's the last time we had a rewrite of the third-class cities code?
It's recent. We've had one in the last 4 or 5 years. The code was mine. Right now we're working on the first-class township code. Is really the last one.
Okay, good. But in terms of modernization, there are 4 areas that I often heard about throughout my career, from both sides of the political spectrum, and they surrounded for local governments: local property tax reform, prevailing wage reform, collective bargaining reform, and municipal pension reform. Those are the 4 things. Now, ironically, and though I've heard the people talk about not having the numbers, there's probably no 2 better people who understands what numbers mean than Senator Argel and Senator Fulmer, who have basically been the leads on SB 76, the school property tax reform, you know, and trying to put that together and lost a 24-24 tie with the Lieutenant Governor voting against it. That was right before I got there. But numbers do matter. And I think there's people who really want to address these issues. And I really wonder, until we address some of those 4 key things, which all have huge ramifications, and trust me, we hear about it whenever bills like that are introduced. People come out. We had a hearing, a joint Senate and House hearing, if you recall. I think it was maybe a year or 2 ago, on municipal pension reform. Yes. You know, and we see who it draws out. Everyone comes up with a reason why we can't do things, and it's usually a vested self-interest in some fashion. Leads to my next point, which I mentioned earlier. I think it's kind of insulting with Act 47 that we do wait until the very end when municipalities are experiencing distress. And if there's no better sign of that, I think one of the, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but I think one of the first entities to ever enter into Act 47, out Western PA, ended up being in it for 20-some, 30 years. And why would they give up the flexibility? Why would they give up the assistance? And meanwhile, we allow everyone else to struggle along. We should be kind of giving them not those temporary things when things are bad, but obviously when things are good. And the last thing I'll mention, leading to a question, actually there are two things. We talk a lot about the revenues that are coming in and how they're not adding up right now. We need a better way to do that. My question is this: a huge portion of what you spend is on obviously public safety, and there's no bigger expenditure than in police forces. I've long been an advocate, and I completely believe that Pennsylvania is such an oddball when it comes to how it does law enforcement. We're one of the only states that has the setup that we do. And it's very frustrating watching the battles in Harrisburg. The latest one is on this quote-unquote state police fee. And I can tell you all, you hear the talking points, the statistics don't back them up. We create this we have versus have not between municipalities, and it's really counterproductive. And it's all a smoke screen for what truly needs to occur, and that is police structural reform in Pennsylvania, like most states have. Would you support the concept of a countywide police force? Or do you feel you would have pushback from your residents in terms of control, whether it's going to impact on the patrols in their own neighborhoods or the attention that they get? How do you feel about restructuring? Because my sense is, interesting enough, I hear a lot about it. I think municipalities would be interested in it. Interestingly enough, police chiefs, many in our own county here, think that we should have a countywide police force, and most of the DAs across the entire Commonwealth all support the concept of a countywide police force. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd like to just say, inherently I think those things are important. And I want to go back to the mayor's comments about the local services tax, because, I think some counties that would work and some of them because of the politics, as you know. But you mentioned those 4 points that the local municipalities want. I go back to Lancaster's inability to tax the way they want, and all of our inability to really control arbitrary rulings that demand things upon us which we can't afford, and then the pensions. I continuously go back to those, because if we can fix those, and then add some of those added layers of things, and the numbers are there. I mean, if I were the state legislature, I would want to know what the city of Reading, Lancaster, Gore, Paris, what it's costing this state from an educational, from a subsidization standpoint, from a downstream standpoint, from the prisons and the courts and everything else, and say, how do we mitigate it? How do we invest up front to shut those costs down so that we can save this state hundreds of millions of dollars and at the same time improve these cities? If we could focus at those 4 levels first, because I like the creativeness, but again, Act 47 has done nothing for us other than make us raise taxes, chase everyone else away, reduce our police department, and it's not giving us the long-term solutions that we need. And, I just see those issues that when we get out of Act 47, we'll be out of there probably in a year and a half. There we are again, exposed to those same risks that will, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, will bury us again. And I don't care how many zones we put on top of us, and how many other, added fixes, we're going to be up against the wall. And I just want to reiterate that, because I think those foundation issues, and if they can be articulated in a way where people really see the numbers, your point about the numbers, if you could really see those numbers and say, wow, I didn't realize they were that big. Let's start saving money by curtailing this up front. I think we all win. Because I think these cities, when they're distressed, it costs the state more than the cities, and I don't think everyone in the state sometimes realizes it. So I just want to make that clear. I think a county force would be great. I'd love to see it. I'm all into the efficiencies of those types of operations. But right now, people, because of the distress of the city of Reading like ours, they really want to consider it. So fixing those foundation issues would allow those things to transpire.
I would just add that it would be I'm very interested also in efficiencies of operations and how we can do that. I think there's a great deal of disincentives right now for having this kind of conversation because obviously we have a highly concentrated population in a very small geographic area, and our policing needs are very different than like Strasbourg, for example. And so figuring out all of that. And while I agree with you, Senator Martin, in terms of the modernization of the 4 issues that mentioned, and without going into details, because I think that there's some places where we would agree to disagree, I would say that we have to walk and chew gum on these issues because we cannot wait. I mean, the Coalition for Sustainable Cities spent a year working on how to reduce those costs through Act 111 and pension reform, and nothing has been delivered. And so in the interim, while we are working on these larger structural issues, the modernization, as you've outlined, those 4 items, we need additional tools because while that process is happening in Harrisburg, and it can take years, and I understand that, to come up with a solution for cities that are very different in terms of their needs as well as their resources, we have nothing to fall back on except for property taxes. And that is hurting the least among us, and that is not okay.
You jumped into my last question. Property taxes. Anything else on the police?
Yeah. There is a prejudice against at least my city, I'm assuming other cities as well, that we don't know how to run things, that all these costs, it's all mismanagement, and there is a well, I'll say, in the past, county commissioners have told me we can't do anything for the city or we will get voted out. Seriously, because it's the city's fault. The city's been mismanaging. Why should the county people bail out the city? And I think there's a certain amount of that in the Senate as well, or at least more in the House, that this battle between the rural and the urban. And so I don't think that there would be much trust on either side to have a joint venture like that. I wanted to add one last comment, and that is, unlike some of what I'm hearing from the other mayors, I am not trying to find more ways to tax the people of the city of York. There is every financial disincentive to come to the city of York. The reason people are in the city is because we love the city, because we love the architecture, because we love being with other people. It's all emotional, but when you talk numbers, the numbers of the current municipal system are destroying us. When the tax rate is 1%, 50 feet away from my city, and it's 5% here, those are the things that are really destroying, stopping investment, all of those things. So I appreciate, and I wouldn't stand in the way of the other mayors and what they want to do, but more taxes are not a solution to the imbalance between county, municipalities, and the third-class cities of our country.
Yeah, I'll just address the policing issue because in Dauphin County, we've studied that issue very closely. And the city's actually been a strong proponent of looking at possible regionalization. I can tell you I've been to multiple surrounding municipalities and pitched mergers which would save hundreds of thousands of dollars for the taxpayers, both in the city and in the municipality, and we haven't found a single taker yet. It's a very tough sell. We did just, with the neighboring municipality, establish a merger of our public works sanitation services with neighboring Steelton that just began in July. That is the type of regional cooperation which I think could serve both municipalities well, save money, and slowly begin to address the structural deficit and perhaps lead to public safety mergers in the future. But it's not from a want of trying on the part of the cities. Oftentimes the resistance is just embedded in the nature of Pennsylvania municipal government.
Yeah, what's sad, I think most states follow the model of a countywide sheriff's department, a metro police department in the middle, and the cities are all on the highway. And my personal belief is all our law enforcement officers, troopers, or whatnot, will still need all that. And I think there's a place at the table for everyone, but people fear job loss. I can remember back when we merged the Red Ridge Transit Authority with ARTA up in Reading. In the beginning, people were like, "You're never going to get that done." What are you going to do with pension and long-term pension obligations? Well, we found that to deal with those legacy costs. There are ways to do this. But it's just one example of what's a very costly thing for a single municipality whose tax base is grown out. That reality we could be doing as a countywide spread of those costs. My final topic I want to talk about, because it's not only what it means to the city in terms of its revenues, but also to the people. There are people here who I mentioned in the beginning, that property tax impact on them, if it's greater, grows at a rate greater than what their annual amount of retirement or their fixed income is, does nobody. And it really harms the least of these. And when you talk about people's ability to achieve that American dream of home ownership, or moving up the economic ladder, property taxes, when you look at that piggy payment on a mortgage, right, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance sometimes is that huge gateway as to whether or not people can never even have that ability. And for anyone, and I run into that in my office often, you hear people say, no one's losing their home for property taxes. I'm thinking, really? Because I have people in my office who are in the process of losing their homes. They'll tell me it doesn't happen. My wife's the county treasurer, and there's lists of people who can't afford their taxes. And so it's from two different angles. The property tax reform argument, though it's often centered around the school district aspect, and Dave and I have talked about this, we really want to start paying a lot more attention as well and coming up with something on the local government side. Now, I will tell you that maybe, I think I was a county commissioner when it was proposed, it was Seth Grove in York, who proposed a property tax reform bill for local governments and listed a menu of different taxing options. The really interesting dynamic is that it got met with fury. And the reason being was there's such a lack of trust. Like they think that automatically they're going to raise XYZ taxes, but then within a year or two, the property taxes will shoot back up as well. So when we talk about how can you devise a reform plan for property taxes that alleviates residents' concerns, we get a diversification which can lead maybe to growth of revenues, but at the same time protect local taxpayers' interests in terms of their fear that, okay, now you're going to tax me in these ways, and just in a few short years, my property taxes are going to shoot up again too. Do you cap it? Do you
cap it and put it all towards public safety? Do it.
Leo? You got 10% of the city.
How do I really feel? No, I think, every city is required to provide, every class 3 city is required to have a full-time police and fire department. Period, end of story. It's a requirement that we have this service, and we depend on them every single day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I would be totally amenable to coming up with a way in which we had a specific revenue stream that was dedicated to pay for public safety that was capped. We are literally using capital bond funds to come up with money to pave our streets because our property taxes are not sufficient to pay the total bill for fire and police. So $36 million in costs and $30 million in revenues, it's there, it's a gap. And so when letters to the editor from all over the place continue to roll in about, what our street conditions are like, I got it. And we are borrowing money to pave our streets. It is completely ridiculous. And I am not interested in raising taxes. I am interested in coming up with an equitable way to pay for a regional resource that is Lancaster City without overburdening the people who have invested here.
We did go about 11 minutes over. I really wanted to, obviously this topic generated a lot of interest, and it's good to see so many folks come out to hear the discussion today. And I don't think there's any mistake in acknowledging the fact that the reforms for local governments are long overdue. I think we got some good information out of this hearing. I want to thank all our presenters today for taking the time to come down and share your stories about the impacts here locally. I want to thank my colleagues who were able to make it from different portions of the state. And a special thank you to the city of Lancaster for being willing to host this event. I think this is a good opening salvo, hopefully, to us working on something to get something done in a timely manner to meet the growing concern. And,
2021.
2021, I don't want to keep you up at Deneen at night, okay? So we will we'll definitely look forward to working with that through local government, the commission, local government committee, urban affairs, others. We can try to see what we can do. So thank you, everybody. We stand adjourned.